Today I'm talking about arrow straightness, and the big question being, do you need .001 arrows? If you don't know what that means or you're not sure what straightness of arrows is best for you, keep watching to find out. We're going to break it all down. So if you've ever looked at buying arrows, either shafts or fully fletched arrows before, you'll see that there is quite a range of prices. At first glance, it might not make sense what the range of prices are, but usually one of the biggest factors is going to be the straightness factor. So if you look at your arrows, most of them will say on them a number that looks like 0.001 or 0.003 or 0.005. That number is an indication of the straightness of the arrow. Now, I'm not going to get into exactly where that number comes from because it doesn't really matter. The point is, the smaller the number, the tighter the tolerance, the straighter the arrow. But the question is, do you need .001 arrows, or match grade arrows as they're sometimes called? Is it really worth the money to get the straightest arrows possible? The answer isn't one size fits all. I myself have built arrows and shot animals with .005 arrows, and I've had zero issues. I shoot long range, 80, 90, 100 yards, not at animals, but in practice, and I shoot fixed blade broadheads. That's a recipe for needing a perfect arrow. So in the past, I've bought the budget .005 arrows, built them up as perfectly as I can, and I haven't seen any issues. Now, would that work for everybody? Not necessarily. This topic came up on a podcast that I did, episode 2 of the Let Off podcast, which is on Apple and Spotify. And it came up very naturally, and I thought it was interesting enough to do a video on it here. Robin Warman, an English bow hunter who I'm friends with, we were chatting, and he was telling me that he needs to shoot full-length arrows because of his draw length. He doesn't have any range to cut his arrows. So when I buy arrows, I measure it out and, do the math and whatnot, but I always cut, 2.5, 3, 4 inches off my arrow. He doesn't do that. He doesn't have the room. His draw length is so long that he has no choice but to shoot a full length arrow. The point behind this is that when you're an average guy like me and you're cutting 3, 4, even 5 inches off your arrow, shortening it will make that arrow straighter. In a sense, if you have a full length .005, the lowest straightness rating arrow, cutting it off will increase the factor of its straightness. Not literally, but effectively, that's how it works. What I've seen a lot of people do is take a shaft, pretend this is just a shaft without the fletching, but it is an uncut arrow, and they'll spin it and they'll look for wobble. Spin it all the way to one side like this, spin it all the way to the other side like this, and try to figure out which side has more wobble than the other, if any. On a .001 arrow, it's not going to make a difference. It's going to be perfectly straight all the way. On a .003 arrow, probably also going to look perfectly straight all the way. On a .005, you may or may not see a little bit of wobble in one side or the other. What you can do in that sense is the side that has wobble on it, cut off of that side. Of course, your labels won't match up because, you cut 2 inches off this side on one arrow, 2 inches off this side on another, but that doesn't really matter unless you're in it for the aesthetics. So in doing that, you can actually make lower grade arrows, lower straightness grade arrows, much straighter by just assessing where the lack of straightness is in that arrow. But is this totally necessary? I don't entirely believe so. It is fun and it has a purpose, but I don't know that it's completely necessary. So, to bring this all back to my first point, if you have a very long draw length and you don't have the ability to cut your arrows down very much, if at all, like my friend Robin, you may want to go with a higher grade arrow, the .001s or the .003s. If you're an average guy cutting, 3, 4, 5 inches off your arrow, you're going to be fine with .005 arrows for the most part, because as you cut them, you're effectively straightening them, especially when you consider that you can, to an extent, pick and choose where you're cutting and make the arrow straighter or less wobbly in that way. The other thing that needs to be a factor is your speed. If you're trying to push 300 feet per second, even 290 feet per second, you simply need straighter arrows. You're pushing the upper limit of how arrows like to fly, and you just need everything to be that much more dialed. Do you need .001s? Absolutely not. I shoot 296 feet per second. These are Easton Axis .003s. They are absolutely fine. I am cutting a few inches off the end, but even if I wasn't, I've never spun one of these .003s as a bare shaft and seen any wobble. But if you're really pushing speed, it's a consideration, and you might want to stay away from the .005. The other thing to consider would be squaring off the ends of your arrow shafts. If you have a .001 arrow, and it's the most expensive match grade arrow on the market, and you don't square the end of your arrow shaft, you may as well be shooting a Walmart arrow, because everything needs to be square, everything needs to spin. If you build this arrow and put a broadhead on the end of it and spin it, and it doesn't spin perfect on the end, it's not going to fly no matter how straight or how expensive your arrow was. On that same note, if you take a .005 arrow that may have a touch of wobble throughout the arrow itself, but you're able to get that front end really squared off and straight to the point where when you're spinning it, you can see no wobble in the front end, it's gonna fly really well for you. Maybe once you stretch out with fixed blades past 70 yards or at 300 feet per second, you might notice a bit of a difference. But for the average guy, I wonder what the average archer's speed is. I'm gonna say 260, 270, somewhere in there would probably be the average guy's speed. I'm not sure. Tell me what your speed is in the comments. I'd be really curious to figure out actually what is the average compound archer's arrow speed. So comment below, I'm really curious. Anyways, the point being, at average speeds, at average distances, you're going to be fine with the .005 or .003 arrows. Just do a really good job building your arrows, and you can save yourself money that way. The other consideration would be that if you are on a tight budget, or you need a lot of arrows, so you don't want to spend a huge amount of money, go with the .005s, build them the best you can, but your broadhead selection might come into play here. You might want to shoot a more forgiving broadhead. I actually just made this display, so this is cool, I can talk about it. For example, I have the XLS series here. It is our least forgiving broadhead in the sense that you need the best setup to make it work really well, just because it's so big and it's solid. If your bow and arrow setup is not perfect, this broadhead might try to steer your arrow for you from the front end. Whereas when you go to the 1-inch vented, this is extremely forgiving. It works out of every crossbow up to 500 feet per second. You can have a wobbly arrow and this thing will still fly. So broadhead selection definitely plays a factor in your arrow selection. If you already have a ton of a broadhead that isn't very forgiving, well, then you're probably going to want to build a slightly higher end arrow to accommodate that. But if you're starting from scratch, why not get a cheaper arrow, build it really well, and then get a really forgiving broadhead like this 1-inch V series, and you can kind of get the best of all worlds on a budget. This is a really interesting topic. I actually think I'm forgetting to talk about some things here, but if I am, I'll just make another video. And if there's any other points you want me to address on this topic, feel free, write into the letoffpodcast@gmail.com. That's where I'm taking live questions. Write in a question to me about anything you want, or a comment or whatever, and I'll read it on the show and give you an answer even more in depth than what I do on this YouTube channel. Hope you guys learned something with this one. Thank you for watching.